Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Hopefully my voice is loud and clear. I wanted to speak about how the inner realms can activate unconscious skills. And really, what does it mean when your eyes find you? You see, there's some things in life we can talk about which the result of it leads to objective perception. There are ways of speech that take us to take the result of the perception to the subjective reality. And then there's ways of speech where I would say a person is not really trying to speak about an object and it's not really trying to speak about a subject, it's trying to speak about the relationship of both of them simultaneously. When it comes to the inner realms and the conscious and unconscious of human psychology, that is a very important. First of all, not only is the conscious unconscious one of the most important dualities a person can conceive, but it's a duality that has an additional duality inside. That means regardless of what we consider as conscious or what we consider as unconscious, there is an individual consciousness and there's a collective consciousness. And there's an individual unconscious and then there's a collective unconscious. And these are very important relationships to know. When I look at my life as a person who, in my youth, I felt I didn't have an imagination, and as someone now who has found a stable way to interact and relate to my imagination, the sentence of this episode is really the major part of my transformation, I would say. When I was young, I have a twin brother, and my twin brother has since childhood, he's had a very creative imagination. For me, I felt that my imagination was absent, or it was empty, or it was as if I was accessing a level of life where I couldn't see the additional dimensions. In my inner realms, I would say, first of all, in my youth, I didn't have a concept. This thing I'm saying, inner realm, outer realm, it was sort of a personal discovery for me. In my youth, I could visualize it most, maybe sentences on walls. You know, when I was very young, I was afraid of the dark. Very young. And I went and asked my mother, and my mother had a religious upbringing, and she told me, just say the name of God 7 times. This is in Iran when I'm a little kid. And I remember every night before I sleep, I would just, say this mantra 7 times, this prayer. And every time I would say it, it would be as if I felt I was trying to visualize God. When you're a kid, you don't have the strictness of ideology pressuring you into choice, right? That happens later on in life. When you're young, your mind is open to engaging things, but it could be that the imagination is not in the conscious domain. So anyways, I remember every time I would say a prayer, I was trying to, my youthful mind was trying to visualize God. And it wasn't that it's like there's something very profound about a person visualizing an image to a universal idea, or an image to a universal intelligence. Like some people perceive God as good or bad, but imagine you're a young child and your view of God is that you're just being watched, right? So imagine being watched and making a prayer, right? So it was a sort of emotional, I would say, in my youth, I still didn't have image. It was kind of like I felt my brother had an imagination and I didn't. And little did I know that from the simpler levels of reality, suddenly life would take a different turn, I'm a person who, I said in these talks, I wanted to be a soccer player. You believe that? However, life took me a different direction, and I consciously recorded the phases of the shift in my inner realms. I think I'm one of everybody has an inner realm, of course, but I think I'm one of those people who has found a way to speak about it. And the way I would tell you was that in my youth until 2011 specifically, I was not living as myself. I was living as a self. That my part wasn't there yet, right? And I remember in 2011, I got one of the biggest realizations in my life, that I realized who was looking. I didn't know what was looking out through my eyes. Imagine you're sitting somewhere and you're sitting on a rock in the middle of a river. That's exactly what I was doing. And I began thinking, all right, who am I? And I noticed my mind puts a thought. And then I ask myself, who am I again? My mind puts another thought. And then you go, like the intelligence goes, like, how can I be 2 answers to the question, who am I? In 2011, I somehow managed to step out of my inner realms. It was some sort of miracle of coincidence and karma. After I stepped out of my inner realms, my perception was different as I trusted the moment. It's not enough, like, let's say a person is like the best person they can be. Is that enough? No. Whatever ability the person has, they require to use it before the time is out, before time's up. So I took a serious interest, and I can tell you it was like one night's vision where I declared that, all right, let me see if it's possible to give 10,000 talks. Guys, here's the important point here. When I decided to do something that was way beyond who I was then, I automatically went to the beyond. I always said it's like some people try to be 1 step ahead, some people try to be 2 steps ahead, some people try to be 3 steps ahead. But imagine you trying to be as far steps as possible ahead as you can be, and then all the first step or second step becomes super easy. In 2011 onwards, there was an explosion of some sort of creative atmosphere in my mind. These talks that I started giving in 2014, after 2011, this would be the progression, where I first I would write. First I would write, and then I remember I started writing poems. Then I started writing books. Then I started recording myself. I would wake up early in the morning, kind of semi-conscious, go in front of the laptop and have no opinion and just begin communicating to kind of see what was there in my unconscious. Or what was consciously accessible in that semi-conscious state. Now, after opening up to the realm of speech, throughout the years of giving these talks, I began noticing that I somehow managed to transform my imagination, or what we used to call imagination, from sentences, from the visualization of sentence. What that means is, when I was young, when somebody would say apple, I wouldn't see the image of an apple in my inner realms. I would just see the words at most. That means somebody said hello, I would see a giant HELLO in my in my inner realms, right? It was sentence structure limited the inner realms, right? But the more I gave these talks, at certain points throughout these talks, I go into a state where it becomes automated. So that means the same way as my heart is beating right now, I'm not thinking about it. It's as if the content that I want to speak about, it's already there in my mind. It's already been seen. And so once the person trusts the moment, the expression then comes out of the sleep. Seldom do they say, I'll say it this way, in movies you see like that kid kind of having problems, goes to the uncle or some friend or someone, and the friend's like, yo man, just be yourself, don't take it too seriously, be yourself, right? And this person's like, what do you mean be myself? But let me tell you, that's the wrong way of saying it. You have to trust the moment or it doesn't progress. So I somehow managed to find in my progression of a creative endeavor in this lifetime, my inner realms change from the slow speed of word after word after word to becoming a film. Right now, anything I hear from people say, I remember. Why? Because you remember films easier than you remember the sentences in a book. Anyways, why am I sharing my own history with my imagination with the listeners? Because the inner realms are very different than the outer realms. The inner realms is a reality where the world is moving, but the world doesn't have mass. What that means is you can visualize, you can touch a table in front of your eyes, but if you were to visualize a table, you can't actually touch it, in the inner realms. In yoga, they speak about the yogi, the truth seeker, in their path and process to finding truth, at some point, access their divine remembrance. In the subtitle where I've written, when your eyes find you, That's literally the person searching for truth, and then at some moment of experience, at a certain antenna range, realizing the person is the truth. How our life moves the moment is the truth of the moment we are. I can't say that I have found 100% the archetype of my past or other moments in the space-time continuum. But when it comes to my inner realms, I have remembered familiarity with it that has nothing to do with this lifetime. That means I don't remember. Imagine right now I'm a podcaster. Now imagine, after this lifetime I simulate, like my consciousness simulates somewhere else, for example. Probably not, but let's say if it does. If it simulates into another lifetime and I'm living in that lifetime, and imagine somebody passes me a microphone in the next lifetime. It's as if all these talks that I've given, the memory of this resonance activates. It's as if it's not that we have past lives, is that we can perceive past conceptions to a present phenomenon. In my inner realms, I have had moments where pretty much I'm sitting still and silent in a meditative state. In my inner realms, I am a different identity, not a visible identity, not a shape, but a way of looking at shape, right? That is familiar, but it is also familiar not from here, right? So I'm pretty much that person saying, hey guys, there is ways our inner realms will move where we access modalities of experiences, that are not from this life. Now, I'm not saying it's from another life. Let's say somebody's like, yo, was I like a great artist in my past life? It's not like that, I would say. I would say that it's just remembering. It's like energy doesn't have memories. Energy is just energy. The human individual body has a memory because it travels in the space-time continuum. It's like someone saying, remember what you did yesterday, right? And then it's like someone saying, remember what you did 10,000 years ago. And then it's like someone saying, try to remember what you did 10,000 years in the future, for example. You see, the archetypal relationship is based on the body. Our skills consciously activate because the body is like a candle and the mind is like a candlelight. This candlelight, as it moves in the darkness of the space-time continuum, illuminates the moment. Believe it or not, there's two sources of life on Earth. One is women. The other, I would say, is every being's mind or access to the future. That's a creative dimension that's not just limited to, man, women, the biological limitations, We have to honor biology, by the way, guys, because in the future, technology can interfere with our biology and there needs to be backup systems. That means we don't have to just protect nature in front of our eyes. We got to also protect the nature of the inner earth. How the idea of man is starting from a natural state. Now it may go into an unnatural state. But in this episode, I'm not really talking about cyberspace. I want to just tell people that there's a way you can live on this planet, that you remember from a non-dual state how you are being rather than what you were when you were being. You know? Or imagine somebody is a great driver. Let's say you are, or let's say you're a great pilot. Okay, I have a chapter in my science fiction. I'll share this with the audience. Excuse me. In this science fiction work of mine called The Messenger of Giants, there's a chapter titled The Andromedan Pilot. Now, what happens in this chapter, the world is too big for me to explain in this episode, but I'll just say very simply, the story is set in the year 5025. And there is an Andromedan star fleet flying in space nearby Earth. And it's like a crew, it's not a fighting spaceship. And the Andromedans in my science fiction novel, they are enlightened beings. I've pretty much given them that archetype. You know, the Andromedans are a very advanced, and because they are so advanced, they are peaceful, you know. They're peaceful, just really kind of high, you know, honor, galactic honor kind of civilization. But anyways, so the story of the Andromedan pilot is that there's this group of Andromedans in this spaceship that are going outside of Earth's orbit in the year 5025. And the way it begins is that I have created an evil species. I mean, in every story you need to have conflict to some degree. So in my science fiction, I have written, I would say, I called them the Darkons. They are these giant insect-looking, smog and electricity kind of clothed entities. Right? They're pretty much the evil species that is trying to dominate the galaxy in all parallel dimensions. So anyways, this Andromedan pilot, you know, is with its crew and it's flying, and this Andromedan pilot gets attacked by the Darkons, which are the most advanced evil species, you know, in the universe, in the novel I've written. Now, the Darkons have created a machine called the Soul Destroyer. And any being, this machine, anytime this beam hits this machine, the Soul Destroyer hits someone, their soul gets destroyed. And because it's science fiction, I've given myself permission to write that. You know? And so it's a Soul Destroyer machine, and the story of the Andromedan pilot is that if you, by the way, I forgot to mention this, if you don't get out of, if your consciousness doesn't leave your body before the Soul Destroyer beam hits you, you stop existing in the universe, right? So the story of the Andromedan pilot is he's the only one who manages to eject out of his biological body before the Soul Destroyer destroys his ship. You know, and he falls into Earth, and in my novels, planets have a karmic gravity as well. They don't just have a gravity of just objects. There's a subjective gravity where it's karma. So he ends up incarnating as a human being. His consciousness ends up incarnating as a human being on Earth. And that's pretty much the beginning of the chapter of the Andromedan pilot from my science fiction. Now, I want you to imagine that Andromedan pilot touching a giant star spaceship debris, and because he's an Andromedan, in the story he remembers everything. He's like a human being, you know, but he remembers everything from what he was and who he was and where he was and all the Soul Destroyer events and whatnot, right? And so I feel that there is something strange. I mean, I don't want to just shout past lives, future lives to people, but as long as we have time, we are giving the psychology a permission to visualize itself in the inner space locality. What that means is, as long as there's time, we're multidimensional. And people don't realize if there is no time, there is no character in a story. Reality is just a photograph. So, let's say a being, whether you're an Andromedan pilot poetically, or you're, let's say, I don't know, a podcaster, and your next lifetime you find the microphone analogy. Ultimately, the world moves on and our memories get sculpted by everything else, really. In the inner realms, I have noticed that it's not that we have a body. That means I'm that person saying in front of our eyes there's a biological body. Behind our eyes, there is just attention where phenomena is moving in it. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, I'm this biological organism, but simultaneously, I am the space of awareness where my body, this laptop, this table, and all my ideas in the inner realms are being in. Right? It's as if there is a sphere around everyone, but we think we're what's in this sphere. When you realize your soul, you realize the sphere has an inside and outside. What that means is there's a reality inside the sphere and there's a reality outside of the sphere. And hilariously, both realities point to the void. When I was young, also I'll tell you something, I didn't like waiting. I always had this impression of, my father that, so me and my twin brother, when we were young, we would wait for my father. We would hold the elevator door open for my father to come. When we would get earlier to the elevator of our apartment when me and my brother were young. And there were times where my dad was waiting for me and my brother, but when we would take too long, he would just leave. And I don't know why, but there was something about that which, when I went to the inner realms, and there was a sort of point where you see who are you waiting for when it comes to truth. Like, seriously, what is the person waiting for in any sort of context of the truth of reality? Even the concept of truth could be ignorance. That means truth could be a verb. It could be like, there's a huge possibility it's not a noun. And everybody's being taught knowledge as if everything is a noun. Wars are started over nouns, and progress comes from verbs. The species right now, I think most people, their success is a noun. I think very few people have this mentality that success is a dynamic state of being. It has nothing to do with the content of it. Okay, so in the chat section, Jesse Way says your Andromedan pilot story is pretty interesting, but where did you get the idea from? So guys, in 2015, I think 15, 16, that's when I started writing the Messenger of Giants chapters for it. And I would go for walks, guys. I would go for walks, just alone go for a walk. And as I would go for a walk, in the middle of my walk, I would see an event. I would see a sort of cinematic trailer of my imagination of an event. So I will tell you, when it comes to writing science fiction, as an author, to give others a recommendation, or at least to tell people what my method is, my imagination gives me snippets. It gives me snippets, then I connect the dots. So what that means is I got a vision of this Andromedan pilot idea, then I, in some sense, animated a chapter around it. And this concept of the Andromedan, it's something where it also has to do with my own pastime. not, it's like I'm not saying that's a personal thing. This is a science fiction thing I shared with you. But for me, the concept of a pilot and the concept of our neighboring universe being a sort of, a mentor to our universe is like that idea has a sort of allure to me, right? So it came from walking. A lot of my visions for things come in moments I don't expect. So a lot of the times for these talks that I think of when I'm driving, and sometimes daily I gotta drive like 40 minutes. So in that drive, my mind is literally, my attention is to outside of the car, maintaining and managing the car, but my inner realms goes on a sideline, like a side simulation, and I have in some sense managed to train myself to be able to be in any moment and think of something else, but also receive the moment of it. That means my inner realms are instantaneous at this point. What that means is I can teleport between images of it without getting attached. So as I give these talks, if I was to, I keep telling people we're antennas, and and all the spiritual people on the planet are like, say what? Have you heard of this? In the chat section, Jesse, no. Guys, when it comes to science fiction, I am that person starting from now and then kind of following the geometrical probabilities of reality. I might have made a mistake by introducing my science fiction in this episode, but there is so much more to it that I should have explained before you understand even that scene of the Andromedan pilot, There's a main character who the story revolves around. And this main character, his senses of self in parallel realities communicate with him. And so as in the story you see his life progressing, you see his parallel lives progressing too. Anyways, guys, back to the topic. Let's say it's some sort of recap. I'm that person saying, hey guys, in front of our eyes, outer realm, objects. Behind our eyes, inner realm, subjects. The human being is semi-objective, semi-subjective. What that means is when we physically move, we identify as an object more. When we are still and silent, the mind is moving more than the body. And the mind, the best thing I could say to anybody from any sort of intellectual circle, René Descartes' mind-body dualism was correct. But it's René Descartes' mind-body dualism plus more. What really reality is. That means René Descartes, he managed to get a concept into the educational system that I was like, bravo, bravo, just like clapping in my inner realms. So I'm saying to people, we have this notion that in the outer life we got to do something special, and then the inner life changes. This has made people chase over methods, techniques, substances, ceremonies, and all sorts of strategies in trying to become aware of their inner realms. But the thing that I would say every ideological system has missed is that truth, the moment it becomes non-dual, has no mission. So there is a state we are all being that whatever we do, it doesn't matter. It doesn't touch that state. As if eternity is standing behind glass and what it sees over the glass is the temporary life. What it sees through the glass. It's as if light is hitting objects, it is entering my eyes, It is hitting the what do you call it? The retina, the edge, the wall of the eye, where there's nerves there that register through red. And so it's like the light that hasn't gone into the eyes yet. You know what it is? It's like, how would I say it? It's as if we've been trained on this planet to use our bodies. And the reason we haven't been able to use our minds because the user doesn't function in duality. And so that inner realms, I would say, sort of remembrance of your true eyes. The unconscious is filled with endless ideas, endless behavioral possibility, endless character creation. That means literally there can be endless types of creatures. Literally the inner realms can fathom it. I feel there's different levels when it comes to archetypes. Archetypes can be, this is something that I'm not going to say Carl Jung is saying because I'm not sure, but I will tell you in my observation of just archetypes or what the ego is being a shadow of. It's as if the faster the archetype, the faster the individual moves in the moment, the less of an individual it is. Guys, I got it. These are the two ways to okay, the sound's gone. There's two ways, okay? Or let me see how I can explain. First, we look at the creature in the world. Then we wonder about the dimensions of the world. Then we wonder about the dimensions the creature has access of the world. It's like we have to find a strategy for our inner life, and we have to find a strategy for our outer life. Now, in the outer life, let's say we are simple, or this is kind of like what I wanted to explain. Imagine we have the concept of a runner, okay? A marathon runner. Let's just look at that concept. Before the starting point where, I don't know, you see somebody shoot a gun with a sign and then before the starting point, you know, there is literally nothing. There is no runner. Nobody is running before the reality starts. From a philosophical perspective, the runner is only the runner when it starts running. And I'm saying we are only an individual when we act like an individual. If we are completely still, no self, non-dual, singular, and if we go infinitely, the faster we move, we become non-dual. That means Human psychology is a reaction to a certain speed of living, the individual concept. The inner life may start with like a sort of archetypal game where the person's like, I'm a type of self in a hierarchical system. You know, there's better senses of self, there's worse senses of self. I'm gonna dodge the worst senses of self and go only towards the better, you know? Let's say somebody has that. In reality, it's like you are in a hierarchy in front of your eyes, and as even the individual subject, but as the individual subject expands, so does the hierarchy. We're living in a world where human beings are updating, but their societies and systems in their outer world are not. Our inner realms are updating faster than the outer realms, and the moment this happens, the species becomes depressed. You know? I mean, I think all science fiction writers are like, at some point, if I write my science fiction, will people pay less attention to the present? But in reality, the present is going to the future. Right now, people are so judgmental in society, in Civilization 1.0, that anything a person says, their past is being compared to it. You never compare someone's future self to them in the present, you know? Because if a person did, everybody's future self has a potential to be great. That means, imagine so you meet a person you know, and if you judge them based on the past, you will find 1,000 faults in the person. If you judge them by the future, they can always be a better person, you know? And if human psychology once sped up like a particle, imagine right now, the human psychology, a duality is a solid state, solid chemical state of a substance, right? The particles are moving slow. As the particles move faster, the object becomes a liquid, right? So imagine as the dualistic system, as thinking that we're just, one singular thing in the void. You know, in some sense, we go beyond duality. So literally, we go from the liquid state of mind, which is the character in the story psychology, and we go to the gas state of mind. And the gas state of mind is kind of like, right now, we are on the side of the coin where we are passengers of the world. And then there's another dimension, imagine, like a coin on the other side of the dimension we're in, where we are the pilots, actually. So you can say unborn beings are doing what born beings are being. One's remembrance could go beyond their mind. This man by the name of Almas, I remember his last name, he was being interviewed, and the interviewer says, hey man, tell me about your history. And this man says, I have 3 kinds of history. Which one do you want to know? And the person's like, you have 3 types of history? What does that mean? You have 3 types of backgrounds? And the person's like, yeah, I got an individual history, I have a universal history, and then there's a presence, there's a sense of me that has no history. You know, what that means is there's the sort of embodied self, the solid state, the liquid state, and the gas state. So imagine right now we had 3 dimensions, right? Imagine you were being liquid, solid, gas at the same time. The biological body was like the solid component in the moment. The mind was like the liquid component, and the soul was like the sort of gas space. That means the more freedom individual systems are given, and if that freedom can suggest them speeding up, the less they're going to be an individual system. This is why no religion wants to change. No ideological system, no science wants to change. You know, only the mystic was like, man, what's up with language? I'm just going to go in the mountains and directly experience the unknown. Right? The mystics had an audacity, had a presence where I would just be silent in front of, you know? Because language can go only so far, then the eyes have to pilot. You know, right now, it's like you can say being a physical human being is a vacation from an incredible multidimensional presence that the moment it remembers, it is like, you know what it is? It's as if the person thought they have past lives. Then the person's like, what the hell is this past life, future life? It's as if it's like a cube. It's as if it's a cube where a 3D cube is having 6 2D lives. Do you see what I mean? There is no past and present after, there is no past and future at some point. There is just the grand happening. It's as if life is an unknown, intelligent event, and we've been given the wrong brochure on it. Right? And actually there is no right brochure. It's kind of like there is no catalog to truth. You know, there is just it's literally wilderness. You know what it is? That means it's like a nature photographer noticing like a snow mountain line for the first time, stepping out of a cave. It's as if there is no words needed. The event is itself the truth, right? So a person can function in this life at such an experiential state where they are no longer a creature of language. But I would say that's not necessary now. 3,600 years, there will be no human idea anymore. Maybe you might find a giant statue of humanity on like a sort of kind of isolated Earth in the future, but who knows? You know, imagine our species does something next level, right? Imagine the future, the human species is like, yo, we're gonna get filmmakers all around the planet to make the most next level films that kind of summarize all of human life in it. And then we're gonna create these giant cinema screens and we're gonna just throw them in space, you know? Just, and cinema screens that are imagined like somehow by the momentum in the vacuum of the space-time, or what am I saying, space-time, in outer space, like somehow we just have films of what's going on Earth being like on screens in outer space hovering to the edge of the universe, you know what I mean? So guys, if you have a question in the chat section, write MW and write the question. Or I don't know what I'm responding to, you know. You know, guys, there's this story that I kind of somehow found in my talks. Like, I say one eternal being, like here's an eternal joke. One eternal being looks at another eternal being and says, hey, do you have the time? And then they both laugh, you know, timelessly. The outer space has to be rational. Like the left brain is kind of designed to may help us to actually take care of what's in front of our eyes. The right brain is like, you know, there to, in some sense, for the creative dimension. And you know what creativity is? Creativity is the shift in habit. It's literally an added dimension. That means, you know, a creative person, let's say they have 3 dimensions, you know, and then a more creative person came in history and was like, yo, we got 3 dimensions in space, how about a 4th dimension of time, you know? And so the dimension was added. Creativity is realizing the world is not what thought could convey. So, what is it like when your eyes find you? When your real eyes, when you realize your real eyes. To me, it was a sort of acknowledgement of a presence before my personality. That means if my whole life I was trying to be a person, I realized energy is not a person. Energy is actually just an instantaneous presence for attention. That means anytime our attention wants to study energy, it can't avoid how it's being energy before it studies it, right? So when a person actually studies their attention in this life, that's kind of like the divine clue, like that's how you master your intelligence. You study how your attention moves, like again, like a nature photographer, watching something wild in nature happen. So, it's presence. It's an attributeless presence at the edge. That means one edge of the sky is the conscious mind, and the other edge is an abstract infinity. Like literally look at this picture right now that I've chosen, this incredible picture. And in this picture, what do you see? You see an ocean where you can't see its edge. And you see a ship in unknown waters. We are like a consciousness in an unknown world. We are a system that can know things in an incredibly unknown place. And we're like the ant that has noticed there's human beings around, In my inner realms, I don't know what year it was, but the logos, I wrote something down that revolutionized my mentality. And it was this kind of instruction from the logos from a personal dimension of mine, where to not get attached to a face in the unknown, because the unknown can project any face. If you are feeling good, your inner realm of vision is going to be in some sense good. If you feel bad, it's as if you accidentally fell into hell, And those shamans and those human beings on the planet where you would categorize them as the psychedelic mind, those people who are studying their consciousness through lenses of chemical interference. It's as if the psychedelic mind can be pushed into states whereby the mere shift in attitude, the inner realm of the content of one's psychology changes. It's like a person could be super happy, then somebody comes and says, "Hey, stop being happy, I don't like it." And the person may suddenly stop being happy, And there's a conditional happiness and there's an unconditional happiness. Most people seek a conditional happiness in the outer realms. But imagine in the future, everybody had enough resources and world hunger and pure water and all the climate issues, everything had been solved, right? We would be left to kind of add dimensions once we have completed previous ones. There is a huge inner dialogue component to everything I'm saying in the inner realms. Even though I'm telling you that I see images, I see film, like cinema, as a sort of cinematic experience of language behind my eyes. There is also inner dialogue, and inner dialogue, it's like these are levels. So if you are a good listener in this earth, you can close your eyes and still figure out what's happening around you. Do you know? So imagine there's a level of listening where the person is trying to find something, is seeking some sort of treasure or something, and then there's a level of listening that has no preference on the moment, and it's like, what are these sounds that are entering my ear for the first time? That type of listening is so incredible. Because this art of listening is the same art as meditation. It's as if when people are, the viewers that are listening to this podcast, you're kind of technically meditating, but it's the content of someone else's mind that's moving. When you truly sit down in nature 10 to 20 minutes throughout the day, just sit down still and silent and kind of like poetically recharge your phone, but not your iPhone, your iThought. What I mean by this is that by being still and silent, we begin to notice how experience is existing. But if we move, we notice how existence is being experienced. Like we are the existence being experienced. That means a person running, let's say, here's what I'll say. I'll say a person can actually, the mind is like another realm, and the speed of the attention in that realm can move differently. A person can be listening to a boring conversation or like a boring lecture in a university, and their attention could literally be in the future. What am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do a week from now? What am I going to do years from now? What am I going to do lifetimes from now? What am I going to do eons from now? What am I going to do when I become the universe? It's as if they said think big, but they didn't say how big. I think contentment, true contentment, leads to preferencelessness. That preferencelessness is an also simultaneous acceptance of all the simple ways the world is being here. From that simplicity, if you can observe attributelessly, you will notice how much your mind is moving and you're not noticing its content. The inner realms have so much access. They're kind of like free cyberspace. It's like a free cyberspace technology. It's like cyberspace before cyberspace. It was inner space. It was the imagination. That is the closest thing. It's, how Tony Stark had Jarvis? It's as if the human being has the inner realms, has the mind. Isn't that cool? And in ancient tradition, they say the mind is a great servant. The mind is a lousy master, but a great servant. There we go. So, and this man by the name of George Patton, I believe he says you must serve before you command. So if you take these two ideas for a moment, in order to access the mind, so pretty much the algorithm I'm trying to share with the listeners, what you can take away is I'm saying try to find a moment in life where you're content And the moment is super simple. You're too simple to be anything, imagine. Super simple. You know, like Leonardo da Vinci says, simplicity is the most ultimate sophistication. So just be super simple. Now, the algorithm is that you have an intelligence, and if you want to master your intelligence, you serve your intelligence to get acquainted with the workings of your own mind. And as you serve your intelligence, what ends up happening is you end up changing roles with it. So all those people in the spiritual community that are following their Jungian synchronicities, you know, and looking at clocks and seeing like what, you know? Oh, that Jungian synchronicity, all those spiritual signs are the phase of life, that phase of serving your mind. Once you fully serve it, the mind reveals its nature to you. And in the Sufi tradition, they called this the pearl. That means you're like an oyster and there's a pearl inside you. When the oyster opens up, there's the pearl. Or in the Buddhist tradition, when the lotus opens up, you know, as if all dimensions have been responded to and the intelligence is ready to activate. So the algorithm is find a simple state of preferenceless witnessing, trust the moment, the whole moment, live in this life. Your mind will communicate to you, or you can say the mind is the translation of how the universe is communicating to you as existence. As you serve your mind, you understand it, you work with it, and be careful that this is a symbiosis. What that means is no way in any sort of metaphysical system, if the human idea is being forgotten quickly, or the person's like trying to be something more than human, that metaphysical system is a waste of time. I'm telling you. Because it doesn't matter how much you go towards a higher self, there's endless higher selves, you know, when the sky has no edge. You know how this doesn't end, right? So truth in an individual domain has access to infinity because it is a fragment of one giant complete event, right? That means it's as if in the Vedic thought, they explained it pretty nice. They said 54 million, I think it was 54, they say like 54 million years, you know, for Krishna. It's like 54 million years for the human being is equivalent to 3 days of Krishna dreaming all of existence. Like, do you see the level of that? So when you go to serve your mind, you're not trying to serve some archetype, because in the inner realms, sure, like imagine the Cookie Monster. You see the Cookie Monster, you know, in your inner realms, and the Cookie Monster is like your spirit guide or something. You know what I mean? Like that shit, you know, any image can be given to it. Right? So the point is not the image, the point is what we gain from the experience as reality. Right now, there's a lot of people who feel they're on this planet, metaphysicists who feel they're communicating to other beings. There's literally mediums, there's literally in downtown Toronto probably like 5 like psychic shops, you know. And so that's all, like it's honorable, it's commendable, believe it or not, even having a relationship with beyond the veil, like just having the concept that there's other dimensions and we can have a relationship with that intelligence is a beautiful concept. But I'll tell you, beauty shouldn't be an obstacle for truth. That means the result has to make a choice on what value system it prioritizes. That means if we want a certain result, we have to have a certain value. You know, if I want, for example, an advanced civilization, I literally, when the concept of the advanced civilization arose in my mind, I forgot who I was. It's like I had found an ideal so much bigger than myself, you know? So you serve your mind, and this may come across as you talking to the logos, you experiencing your spirit guides guiding you. If you were a shaman, you would have like the ancestors guiding you. If you were someone from the New Age community, like galactic beings are guiding you. If you're a religious person, the will of God is guiding you. Do you see what I mean? Like in the inner realms, there's a relationship people have with the world that is, mostly it's like kind of human emotions amplified into mythos, into mythology, and to a mythologically abstract level. But the inner realms, you serve it. What that means is, I'm telling you a hilarious approach where be super simple, and then trust life. See what happens. This doesn't mean don't be cautious. I'm saying trust it though. That means right now I gotta trust myself if I want to give this talk. Right, I gotta trust that. All right, I'm doing something now. So you establish a trust. For me, the way I served my inner realms, and in religious tradition, or I would say in the yogic tradition, for the Bhakti yogi, it was an offering of love to the universe. And when I say love to the universe, not like, like a heart-shaped balloon love. I mean, when you realize existence is here, guys. It's here. We are here. There's something just blissful, as if everything is already here, All that we need to advance is right here. So, through that service of the inner realms, and the only way you access it is through decency, because if you're indecent, karma is gonna capture you. That's too heavy. Karma is gonna interfere, is gonna shake the simulation. And karma means your past selves are getting control over who you are now. That means what you caused in the past is catching up with you. This is why when somebody goes through an experience of suffering, they shouldn't be sad. They should be like, okay, I flipped the page on that chapter of experience. At least some karma was filtered out, So check this out. Now let's say for a couple years, you're like, all right, I'll trust my intuition. And you start I don't know. For me, it was like writing and communicating. That was kind of my devotion. If you could see me as a sort of Bhakti yoga, Bhakti yogi, a person who's trying to use love to find truth. It's as if like, every episode or every moment I animate as a human being is like I'm giving back. Here's the thing. The poet Rumi says, before death takes away all that is given, give away all there is to give. So my perception is kind of like, all right, I'm a temporary physical being. I'm here once. The inner realms, I personally have already accessed them, so I've attained my victory. But now in regards to the outer realms, the value of the inner realms is to share it to the outer realms. And the more a greater geometrical idea database we have on the planet, the more perceptions we're using. Pretty much every human being that's being born, even though it's contributing to overpopulation, but another genius potentially as arose, right? So what I mean by that is, it's like we are 8 billion problem solvers, even though it may feel a bit crowded until we go towards civilization 2.0 and build sky cities. So after you have served your mind, you go into samadhi. And this samadhi is not something you go into by your free will. The moment finds you. That means, you know how they say in Zen tradition, it's like when the student is ready, the master appears. Right? So similarly, when you reach that antenna level of consciousness, it automatically happens. in my experience, that shift from mind being your master over your life to the mind being able to serve your life force, the shift is you in your service get to an inner archetypal breaking point. That means you go all out in something. If you're like, for example, a single parent, you go all out. You know, you try to be the greatest parent known in history, for example. You know, or if you are, for example, let's say a physicist, you go on being the greatest in whatever you're doing. It's like the attempt. It's like trying to express. It's trying to see if the ultimate expression is possible, even. In order to see if it's possible, like here's the thing, the impossible is impossible, but we can still attempt it, right? So if we can attempt it, this, you know, the impossible becomes possible. You know, to do that selflessness, it's as if as you serve your mind, you're working with the kind of like the soul of the planet poetically, or the soul of the universe, or whatever, like the logos, like it's its own rhythm, it's its own intelligence. As you're working with it, when you trust the logos, and poetically, or in a mystical context, if I could say, when the logos trusts you, if you automatically remember in the same way of accessing a different field, a different memory field. And when you access that memory field, you instantaneously know how to do something. Just like that scene in Matrix where, what do you call it? Like, you know, they update, you know, Neo's mind, and he just stands up and he's like, yo, I know Kung Fu. You know, so it's the same. But in the inner realms, it's through the experiencer realizing attaining freedom from an archetype. That means, imagine a child is born into this world, and the parents are like, you're a good boy, good boy, good boy. And this child is literally like a dolphin jumping through loops, being a good boy. And at some point, this person does something bad, and it's like, yo, I'm not good anymore. You know, you see the deeper dimensions in life come. I wouldn't say when a person grows up, life becomes more cruel. I'll say life becomes more multidimensional. That means those people who are senior citizens, they have probably a really advanced multidimensional inner realm based on all the different days as memories that exist in their psyche, right? That means it's like an 80-year-old person compared to, let's say, an 18-year-old person, let's say an 88-year-old person and an 18-year-old person. The 18-year-old person may have more knowledge and a more up-to-date understanding of like what is the facts of the era or the paradigm, or like what is the normality of the current generation, what is the truth of the current generation of the status quo. But the person who's 88 has literally seen so many ways the roller coaster go up and down that to them it's like, in some sense, not how would I tell you, there was this incredible interview where Charles Bukowski was being interviewed by some guy. And Charles Bukowski, the guy's like, hey, Charles, are you afraid of death? Like, that's a heavy question to ask, like an old legendary writer, right? And Charles Bukowski says no. You know, he has such a, you know, unique way he speaks. He says no because he's starting to notice how things repeat in life. That means after you've lived through a couple of winter and summers, then your attention goes to something more, you know? in my experience, the moment where you are going, that your ego is serving your mind, okay? And when that moment comes, when you trust, like attention trusts existence instantaneously, that means there's no thing or object or subject. It's literally an instant, right? It's literally as if all of time stood still and froze, and that instant, whatever thought was in your mind. Do you know what I mean? Like it would be that in that sense, right? So what tends to happen is that the archetype and the egoic construct you have kind of, the Iron Man suit that you have used to help the logos, let's say, or serve your mind, your unknown unconscious mind, as you serve, the moment you remember your unconscious self, there is complete union with the unconscious. There is no fear. There is a complete recognition of the pure spherical screen of consciousness, and then there is freedom. That freedom is literally the mind has to become a servant, because the the vision of the witness moved a deep end beyond the mind. Right? So the mind is not like the end of things, the mind is just part of a phase of reality. I'll tell you, there's this story, very incredible European story, okay? And hopefully I'll get the story right. Evidently there was this king back in the day, and this king had 4 wives, and on his deathbed, he had the, wife that was like, the most, I think, okay, I'm messing, there's a king, he's on his deathbed, he has 4 wives, each of the wife comes to him, first he calls, like, let's say his, I don't know, youngest wife, and this is the story, guys. It's a European story, and and so this king calls for his youngest wife, and he says, "Wife, I am dying and going to the next world. Will you come with me?" And the wife is like, "No, and I'll probably remarry," And the wife leaves the king. The queen leaves the king, the 4th queen, Then he calls the 3rd queen, and guys, it could be only 3 queens. I could be getting this wrong, but anyways, he calls the next queen, and let's say it's his most popular queen or something. Oh man, I gotta find this story. Hold on, guys. Okay, guys, here, I found it, This will bring peace to the mind of the listeners and also my mind. Okay, so, afraid to venture into the afterlife alone, a king asked his 4th wife, whom he loved the most, and brought her diamond, gold, and elegant clothing, "Would you die with me and go with me to the afterlife?" The 4th wife replied with a sorry, saying she can't do that, and walked away. He also loved his 3rd wife and was very proud and would show her off to neighboring kingdoms. He called on his 3rd wife and asked the same question, "Would you accompany me to the afterlife?" The 3rd wife replied that she loved her life too much and she cannot go with him, and also that she would remarry on his death. Okay, there we go. It was the 3rd wife. The 2nd wife has always been there for him in the times of his need, so he asked her would she accompany him in the afterlife. The 2nd wife apologetically replied that she would not be able to help him this time, but would arrange his funeral and would be there for his funeral. A voice called out and said that "I will leave with you and follow you wherever you go, even if it is to the afterlife." The king looked, and it was his 1st wife. And this was the wife he took care of the least. He felt embarrassed and said that "I should have taken better care of you and given you more attention when I was alive." The moral of the story is that we all have 4 wives. Our 4th wife is our body. We like to decorate it with nice clothes, sexy hairstyle, nice jewelry, but in the end it cannot follow us to the afterlife. Our 3rd wife is our possessions. We spend so much time gathering our possessions, you know. It says, but in the end they can't follow us to the afterlife. It will be given to other people and divided, just like the 3rd wife we marry. The 2nd wife are our friends and family. We trust them. They're always there for us in times of need. But the furthest they can go is the funeral and send us off. Our 1st wife represents our soul. We usually neglect taking care of our soul. That is the thing that will follow us to the afterlife. So the moral of the story, guys, is that the moral is not to have 4 wives, but you know, there's a saying that if a person wants more wives, the 1st wife won't let them, you know. So the moral of the story, guys, is that there is a dimension, just like that person was saying, that there's a history to the self that is not in time, right? So that moment when the person has served their mind, their intuition, they're like, all right, Mr. Within, I trusted my intuition, now what? You know, I'll tell you, that's the moment where if you truly trust your intuition, you have eternal patience. You have timeless patience when it comes to the metaphysical. You know, anybody who's impatient when it comes to metaphysics and philosophy, it's like, you know, it's like you're on the wrong mountain peak. Because that moment where it switches gears, that moment where the individual and the logos, the trust they've had in the invisible, that moment transforms, and everybody has their own version because everybody has a different DNA in regards to how their perception arises of their reality. That moment becomes literally a pure universalism, and it's as if a person is accessing a higher dimension, but they're accessing the simplicity of it. So what it means is that there is no selfhood anymore. The moment there is no self, there is no karma, there is no reincarnation. So if you can be in a selfless state, literally there is no reincarnation. It's like, you know, ascension a la garde, you know, I don't know how to say it, like selflessness is freedom from the past, because the past is only a self. You know, it's like the person's like, who's that guy? And then they're like, oh yeah, I remember my own past. Anyways, the moment the person trusts the logos 100%, literally like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, the logos trust the person and it becomes one unitary will. In that unitary will, there is no, it's as if the individual history and the universal history are projections of the self beyond time. And when you realize this, there is literally, this world is a workspace. This world is literally an office. this dimension, I should say. This human dimension where I'm giving this podcast. This is literally, if it was in a multi-dimensional perspective, it's an office. It's here to be, that means creatures that individualize through the human form. It's as if you're a physical, biological, individual creature. It's literally it's like there's no more obvious clue of what the meaning of life is. You know, it's like it's the activation of the individual in the world. And so many people listening to me, you know, in the future, many of them will be like leaders, you know. Sometimes I think, what if somebody listens to my talk and then becomes the president, you know? I'll be like, are you going to go to the most advanced civilization? Once you completely become content with your presence, this is a strange thing for anyone to say, but your lifetime completes while you're alive. So you finish your life, your inner life. And when your inner life finishes, it becomes a sort of like heaven-like atmosphere, as if you have done the work of the mind that was projected, right? So I'm telling you that it's not just our ability is based on only what we want. You know, when I say there's skills in the unconscious, and as we expand our domain of consciousness through self-awareness and self-inquiry, we access it. I am saying that our minds are the greatest instrument we have in accessing any potential of universal intelligence. And now more than ever, honestly, people don't have to act anymore. The species has already found the void. You know what's going to happen right now in 2021, just for archival reasons, I'll say this, in case the future generations find this episode. In 2021, people in the world and in society, just by the nature of the design of the system, both nature-made and man-made, based on the design of the system, people in the world are being two types of self. Even though we have one name and one personhood, but we're actually living two lives in one life. Just like we have two eyes that see one moment, we're living two lives that are one life, right? And the inner life is hidden in how we have an opportunity to communicate the outer life, right? And then we hear from Aristotle here, where he says liars have to unnecessarily remember simulations of themselves. The soul is the universe, the planet is the mind, and the human body is the human body. Our minds are here to serve the planet, you know. Our soul is the universe watching itself. Just like we have consciousness. That means sometimes, you know, this is a very, I don't claim it, but I sometimes think to myself, what if everyone back in the day realized consciousness, but they didn't have a word for it, and the best metaphor they could find for it was the God archetype. The mind is watching everything the person is doing in their life. It's the watcher that's always there. You know, the mind is what is the will of the moment. The mind literally, you can say, is God. The mind is God. If there is a concept of God that is the whole universal expression of intelligence, then it's like mind is God, right? So that means the mind cannot die because it's creating the world where death happens in. And really, it's not the mind; it's the inner witness. I'm just saying mind, just for word's sake. So whoever you are in this planet, you don't have to live a sort of specific way. There is no one method to things. Every person is different, and every person has to just master their craft. In order to master any craft, anything a person wants to attain, they just have to have endless effort in that direction and realize it's all about experiential wave accumulation. So there's a traditional way where we experience a moment and we turn it into chunks, and those chunks become ideas and tidbit, just like sample angles of the moment. The mind cannot fathom death because it is not an object. So if you close your eyes and wonder about life, there's nothing to die, there's just a watcher. If you open your eyes, there's a world that can actually, be disconnected from. An advanced civilization will have advanced human beings. Advanced human beings will even surpass this kind of being a disciple of your own intelligence, and then being the master of your own intelligence, then transcending. You'll transcend both archetypes, and you'll see what I mean when I say we're a pilot. Because after a person lives through so many different types of archetypes, the person's like, okay, how many days can I wake up and be a new self every day? So after the archetypes repeat, you will find yourself to be simply the presence of attention. We are a beam of attention, believe it or not. The mind is an intelligent globe. That means as I'm speaking to you right now, just that I have an awareness to my space, this is literally divinity. Like what species on this earth has access to this? What species on this earth has such a sophisticated use of language? What species on earth can fathom its own death or even create a concept of afterlife? These are things that are not, you can say, the mystery of reality really in this modern time is how an object became a subject to itself for no reason. It's just nature's art book. No reason. As if nature's like, you want an explanation, buddy? Here it is. It's the whole thing. Evolution commands exploration of the unknown. I would say it is no longer an era of survival of the fittest. It is survival of the most efficient vision. In the outer realms, we don't have that many options. In the inner realms, there is incredible amount of ways to exist. Literally infinite, stretching to the void, stretching to the singular, stretching to the dual. Right now I'm using language, that means when I speak, it's like I'm a person. But when I'm just still, who can be a person? There is no who, it's just a moment being a moment. And if there is a state where there can literally be no subject to the object but pure witnessing as intelligent as this intelligent space, this is another way of saying that traditional spirituality saw the soul in the body. Modern metaphysics or modern branches of metaphysics, they perceive in some sense the soul is inhabiting space. So traditional view of the soul like this transmigratory kind of jumper between lifetime to lifetime to lifetime to a degree wherein in metaphysics, let's say spiritualist literature, there is like people who talk about between lives what happens and whatnot. It's like when stories don't fascinate you anymore, direct experience becomes the only way. That means knowledge comes and goes, but the unknown is always here. Those who become content with the unknown, you activate your skills from the unconscious in accordance not to a story, a character in a story you have to be, just in accordance to how, for the first time, the presence, that means attention. That means if a person doesn't do anything, they'll notice their breathing biological engine. Like a breathing mechanism, you know? And once you find contentment with every movement of your body, that means your heartbeat, when the moment you become content with it, the heartbeat doesn't bother you, and there's even an inner stillness, an inner silence. When that inner silence comes, usually some people say it's like your soul takes a shower. And what that is like the mind, the inner realms becomes super still. This is possible, by the way, right? My inner realms, they're kind of like some moments super still, some moments they're just running, and I gotta just grab the edge of the train, You first trust your known self, that's how we survive. Then we trust the known world, that's where we survive. In a known way, with the known self. Then you trust the unknown world. And there's two ways actually. You could be someone who you trust the unknown self. Maybe you were born with that knowing. Who knows? There's so many different kinds of people on this planet. But let's say you start off by, you're like, all right, on the checklist, I got to see my conscious self. On the checklist, I got to see the conscious world. Now the unconscious self and the unconscious world. And the whole domain and scope of metaphysics and philosophy is try to see what else is there. Because what we've seen, we've seen. So as we go beyond the four, you can say dimensions, or let me bring that in later. Let's say you become your whole moment. What do? There is no doer. What do you do then, though? The body, that means it's like once you're content with your unknown self, your known self, you experience multiple known selves in the lifetime. That means the speed of how life happens. Your karma speeds up in front of your eyes. Once you trust your mind, there is no concept of mind, and you just use what you are. I don't know what else I can say at this point for a biological animal. It's if we're just a biological creature nature, and we can just use ourselves, believe it or not. And if we don't use ourselves, most likely something else is using us. You know, if you're in society, you know, and where society is a jungle of different ideological systems, it's like if the person stops surviving in the jungle, like, you know, an animal will pretty much growl or something, you know. You know, there's 8 billion leaders on the planet, but they're all disguised in artificial humility as the followers. There's in any moment a person can have a new attitude. I don't know how, like, suffering can stay when our minds can change. There is this metaphysical concept of, you know, some people trying to enter God's mind, and some people, God entering man's mind. This notion that truth embodies one, once like the same idea that once the master is ready, the student appears, but imagine in the sense where when the human being is ready, God becomes the human being. But this God is not an ideological God. It's closer to Spinoza's God and the type of God that Einstein fathomed. You know, we all want a bright future, but we're afraid of the dark. Zen Master Dogen says, study yourself. To study yourself is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. That moment where you have served your mind, but your archetype has fulfilled its inner life. Well, that means the archetype is complete. It's pretty much played its part, right? So the moment your mind has played its part in accordance to living alongside a living universe, you know, the logos, you know, then there is no more logos in you. The wisdom of the individual has understood the logos is teaching. You know, it's as if pretty much the universe is conscious, and when the human being is conscious, the human being doesn't know if the universe is conscious, and then the human being lives in life, and the universe is like, yo, human being, I'm conscious, and the human being's like, no way, you're conscious, and then it's kind of like a universal co-creation, you know, and then it reaches a certain point where there is no you and I with the invisible other. Do you see? That means that's a person where I would say of true religious faith. They had so much faith in God's creation that they didn't need a book to justify, right? The faith was instant, right? You can say a religious person, look at a secular person and be like, that person doesn't have faith, but faith is an instantaneous sort of initiation of energy into movement. Faith is an attitude that captures the moment or authorizes the moment to go forth. That means it's literally trust in a different cloth, you know. You know, I talked about listening and the chat section became quiet, guys. guys, what is this? Now, I think regardless of whatever story is communicated that one can try to use as a metaphysical blueprint or model, the approach is you either do something new or you you move differently as the past repeats itself. There is no such thing as might after some point. When that sort of servant-master relationship with the mind, with the logos and the individual's archetype, when that phase completes, most likely there will be full synchronization of the inner realms and the outer realms, like a bird that has learned to move its wings simultaneously. So at that point, I would say the person has become an advanced communicator, and the way I define the advanced communicator is that the advanced communicator is the most advanced communication in the universal sector. That means I'm not thinking that the advanced communicator is the most advanced human expression. The advanced communicator is the most intelligent thing happening in this universal space. Call it whatever you like. Something is happening here. Something has noticed itself in the void. And this is equivalent to divinity. It is literally like, it's as if the person's like, studies the Big Bang Theory, and then the person's like, wait a minute though, was the explosion a miracle? And as rulers are thrown from across the table and from across thrones, The inner realms becomes your ally. It becomes something where the person doesn't have a mind. They don't just own their mind. Their mind gives them access to an intelligence that is rhythmically found on this earth. I would not animate the logos. I wouldn't say there's like faced creatures waiting for us beyond the veil. I would say that it's literally like we're fish under the ocean. And there's currents, right? These currents that are moving, and the fish goes into one of the currents and teleports into a completely different location. When it comes to the inner realms and internal perception, as a human being captures the rhythm, their inner realms is where really movement beyond the familiar occurs. So guys, before I end, I'll say that there is endless unconscious skill possibilities. Right now we're living at a time where the image, the outer artificial image, has not been honestly seen through, right? So right now people are kind of artificially demonstrating skill in society. But I feel in the future it will become a pure skill-based and honor point system. That means it's as if an advanced civilization will be like, why aren't the members of civilization being advanced? What is this? And what else can an object that's we realize it's a subject do, right? We use our inner realms, we use our outer realms. The greatest thing on earth is the concept of invention. The closest thing that comes to touching the divine is literally the concept of invention for the secular. That means inventors for secular audiences should be like, I don't want to say, but they should be to some degree prophet level. Every human being is, from the secular view, an expression of nature, from the theological view, an expression of God. right? A creation of God. And all religious people have the mentality that it's God's will that's moving the universe, so this means instantly that it never made sense to be violent. Violence in religion was misunderstood. It was a cultural justification for the mysteries of a text beyond the human preference. If we take theology seriously. And let me tell you something else. The mind in like everyday's life to me appears as if it's like an empty page and our decisions are right. We don't ever finish what we write. And the idea of an efficient life would be that where the person manages to completely finish off the day, as if finishing off the last sentence of how every decision throughout the day was an essay, and before they sleep they in some sense try to remember how the day happened like a film. This is like good inner realm training in my opinion. You know, guys, I'm actually going to go into a quote tunnel before I end on the theme of creativity, just to see how people have perceived that concept. Scott Adams says creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep. William Plummer says creativity is the power to connect the seemingly unconnected. Edwin Land says an essential aspect of creativity is not being afraid to fail. Charles Mingus says making the simple complicated is commonplace. Making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creativity. Yo-Yo Ma says passion is one great force that unleashes creativity, because if you're passionate about something, then you're more willing to take risks, you know. I would say for a violin player, this is the case. Because passion means you're willing to put the effort. That's all that passion is. Anything you don't put effort in, it's as if that person didn't have a passion, you know. Amala Akineni says critical thinking and curiosity are the key to creativity. Excuse me. Guy Fieri says cooking with kids is not just about ingredients, recipes, and cooking. It's about harnessing imagination, empowerment, and creativity. I mean, it's probably like roasting a duck is not the best harnessing of imagination, you know, for kids. But anyways, let's keep going. Let's see. Victor Pinchuk says art, freedom, and creativity will change society faster than politics. Wow. Yeah, this is one of those quotes that Nico Bizzari says diversity and inclusion, which are the real grounds for creativity, must remain at the center of what we do. David Lynch says negativity is the enemy of creativity. Yeah, because negativity doesn't want to change. Usually the failed psychology feels it's going to miss out if the world succeeds. So the failed psychology has to realize it's the opposite. Actually, if the world doesn't succeed, it misses out. Elizabeth Gilbert says, creativity itself doesn't care at all about results. The only thing it craves is the process. Learn to love the process and let whatever happens next happen, without fussing too much about it. Work like a monk or a mule or some other representative metaphor for diligence. Love to work. Destiny will do what it wants with you regardless. And you know, this concept of destiny will do what it wants with you regardless, that's another way of saying, like, life is a game of the gods, right? Like the yogis had that perception, even though it's not the best perception to have, but it's like, one cannot avoid the forces in nature, in natural science, you know. It's as if gravity is a type of, you know, God archetype, I would say. I shouldn't say God archetype, I should say a sort of transcendental archetype. Marina Abramovich says your ego can become an obstacle to your work. If you start believing in your greatness, it is the death of your creativity. What? Oh yeah, if you start believing, but if you see greatness as much of a probability as failure, it's just like a coin flip, really. You know, because we don't know how far we go if we try something. Tony Buzan says mind mapping is a technique based on memory and creativity and comprehension and understanding. So when the student or a child uses the mind map, they're using their brain in the way their brain was designed to be used. And so the mind helps them in all learning and cognitive skills. It simply helps them in what the brain does naturally. I mean, if you need a mind map, it's not natural, you know. Because really nature means the free will is undisturbed, but society doesn't excuse my language, but it doesn't really give a shit about our free will, right? And it's not that it has a choice, its civilization has not updated to a point where the advanced citizen archetype is more important than money. We haven't gotten there yet. But when we do, it becomes incredible, because then it wouldn't be like good guys, bad guys. It would just be human beings are here once, and what did they do, and how did the history books remember them? Elaine DeHaze says, as the world we live in is so unpredictable, the ability to learn and to adapt to change is imperative alongside creativity, problem solving, and communication skills. And all of these guys are for, believe it or not, survival beyond an enemy. Imagine there's a survival for adjustment, all that. And then you have, let's say, survival for an abstract concept of character, let's say. Bob Iger says the heart and soul of the company is creativity and innovation. Donatella Versace says creativity comes from a conflict of ideas. Robert M. Persick says boredom always precedes a period of great creativity. Justin Trudeau says you get more diversity and creativity in your problem solving, and you end up having a much better and more representative approach to solving the challenges faced by the population you see. Guys, I would say honestly, we got to realize, even though politics is for human beings, so the more human we are in it, the more dehuman decency political leaders have. It's just the more chilled out and efficient the world will then. Henry Matisse says creativity takes courage, and it also takes an incredible interest to explore the unknown. I'll add that. Dead Mouse says, I don't believe there's a cap on creativity and passion. Yeah, as long as we don't see the edge of the sky, there's no end. John Romero says, you might not think that programmers are artists, but programming is an extremely creative profession. It's logic-based creativity. Neil deGrasse Tyson says rational thoughts never drive people's creativity the way emotions do. Bill Moyers says creativity is piercing the mundane to find the marvelous. Naomi Judd says solitude is creativity's best friend, and solitude is refreshment for our souls. Mae Jemison says the difference between science and the arts is not that they are different sides of the same coin, or even different parts of the same continuum, but rather they are manifestations of the same thing. The arts and sciences are the avatars of human creativity. David Grinspoon says our most valuable resources, creativity, communication, invention, and reinvention, are in fact unlimited. That's exactly it, guys. A person may not have resources to build an invention, but they can close their eyes and in their inner realms build like ridiculous amount of prototypes. The inner realms is just once you remember your presence, your personality is freed from how the past is limiting its perception. Ken Robinson says creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. It is a process, it's not random. William Pollard says, without change, there is no innovation, creativity, or incentive for the improvement. Those who initiate change will have a better opportunity to manage the change that is inevitable. Heinrich Rohrer says, science means constantly walking a tightrope between blind faith and curiosity, between expertise and creativity, between bias and openness, between experience and epiphany, between ambition and passion, between arrogance and conviction, in short, between an old today and a new tomorrow. And this thing Heinrich Rohrer is saying, it's not just limited to science, it's just limited to life. Life is so fascinating that all our dimensions really tend to engage in. Eric Fromm says creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. And Shekhar Kapoor says, I have devoted my life to uncertainty. Certainty is the death of wisdom, thought, creativity. So anyways, guys, that was the quote tunnel. I'll read one more, a quote from Nnamdi Azikiwe. He says originality is the essence of true scholarship. Creativity is the soul of the true scholar. So yeah, guys, just pretty much in this episode, I was trying to communicate. It was a pretty long one, but I was trying to paint the picture that your intelligence is something in this life worthy of your observation and study. We're all here once, and even though we're here to engage the outer realms, engage others and whatnot, be a social animal, which is very important, but at the same time we're here to watch ourselves. It's as if we are getting to see ourselves for the first time in every moment that we move, you know. So there's a novelty factor to whatever that can happen, and it's literally just every moment is a three-dimensional landscape of perception, and it's as if in an invisible room overlaid upon this three-dimensional landscape, the inner realms are taking place, and that's where thoughts are. But what we acknowledge as thought, that's a very kind of old school treating the mind like an object way. What it is it's like we're a spotlight on a treadmill, and the content of the treadmill is moving and the spotlight isn't moving. The spotlight is consciousness, but what consciousness actually is awareness. That means it is an attention that has nothing to do with how the outer realms is being, right? It's unconditional to whatever is happening in the sight. The spotlight is not the treadmill, right? So when that is remembered in the psychology, then I will say a person should not worry about trying to be a type of person. They should master their DNA, and in some sense share its fruits with a civilization, because that's literally the only thing we can do with our inner realms. We either see it alone, you know, we keep our inner realms private, or we share them, and that's how novels and reality and language is born. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening, and if you have enjoyed these episodes, please consider becoming a member. Much blessings, and namaste.